The first duty of government is the protection of life, not its destruction. Abandon that, and you've abandoned all. These are the words that were accorded to Thomas Jefferson, author of the US Declaration of Independence. Boris Johnson likes to think of himself as a man of history, and maybe he ought to heed those words, despite the outbreak of the first major ground war in Europe in decades. The Institute for Fiscal Studies estimated in March that the UK's day-to-day defence budget could fall by 3% a year in real terms for the rest of this Parliament. Let's turn to the Chair of Parliament's Defence Committee, who is calling for the government to, quote, wake up, and is launching a new campaign this week to push defence spending from 2% of GDP to 3%, and that is Tobias Ellwood, who joins me now. Tobias Ellwood, thanks for your time. Is 3% enough?
Well, it's heading in the right direction. I think what I'm trying to convince people is that we've turned a corner in our history. What's happening in Ukraine isn't just going to stay in Ukraine, but actually it's going to have huge consequences, both from a military perspective, but also in our way of life. And we do need to spend more on defense as we see Russia and China increasingly exert themselves with greater confidence and challenge our way of life. Our international rules-based order that has served us well for about 40 or 50 years looks very, very wobbly indeed. And I'd go even further, without sounding too dramatic, that there's a 1938 feel to where we are today. And we need to be prepared for what is coming over the hill. Our Army, our Air Force and our Navy actually were cut in their capabilities in the last review that took place a year ago. I'd like to see those cuts reversed and us be ready to have the hard power for what's coming over the horizon.
My guest in the studio yesterday was former Defence Secretary Michael Portillo, and we talked at some length about spending on defence, but in particular about where you get the money from. I suggested you could look at, for instance, and you can only do it once, I suppose, looking at foreign aid. We currently send, for instance, £250 million a year to Pakistan, currently, which is lining up with Russia more than it is with us right now. So we could question some of those spending decisions. But long term, where is the money going to come from? Would you borrow to invest in defence? Where's it coming from?
Well, it isn't for me to spell out where that money comes from. That's for the Treasury to understand the consequences of us not spending money on defence. What happens to our economy, our prosperity, if we don't look after our international interests, because it would be affected as it is now. The fact that we're not leaning into Ukraine enough to close down this war is having a direct effect on the cost of living because of food prices going up, oil and gas prices are going up. There's a global consequence here, and it's rippling right through to what's happening here in the UK. If we resolve and help Ukraine resolve the problems there, that will affect our local economy here, but we're not doing that. And you touched on DFID, international aid spending. You know, that's a really interesting one, because many of these places that are now insecure are places that we've walked away from. Iraq, Syria, Libya, Somalia, Afghanistan. You know, we have given up because we didn't have the strategic patience. My bigger concern is that the world as a whole is getting more dangerous, not less. And there needs greater international leadership. And there's a gap in the market for that, for Britain to step forward, as we've done in the past, to shore up our international support, our allies, and step forward. Because, as I say, authoritarianism is on the rise across the world, and that's what's coming over the horizon in the next few months and indeed years.
Coming over the horizon, armed with nuclear weapons, Liz Truss, Foreign Secretary, says this could be a conflict that takes 10 years to resolve. Do we really have the strategic patience? Does the Chancellor of the Exchequer, do our coffers have the money in them to last for a decade?
Yeah, I mean, really good point. I don't think we have the strategic patience for allow this to last for a decade, and we can't allow it to. If we need to ask ourselves, what is success in Ukraine? What is the goal that we're pouring all these weapon systems in for? All NATO countries must lean in and have a strategic outcome that we're aiming for. To my mind, that must be removing Russia from mainland Ukraine. And that will affect the consequence of Putin being able to sell this to his own people. If we are able to show that Putin has failed, there's more chance that the Kremlin, that the Russian people will remove him himself. If there's any form that this could be sold as a success, then he will actually go beyond Ukraine He'll look at Moldova, Georgia, potentially Bosnia, potentially also even into the Baltics itself. And that, again, means that more kinetic problems, more military insecurity, more requirement for us to spend on defence itself, and, of course, more problems for our own economy.
Tobias Ellwood is chair of the Commons Defence Select Committee. Tobias, thanks very much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it.